Shalom, this is Yair Davidiy representing Brit-Am. I'm speaking to you from the land of Israel. Today we are about to discuss Isaiah 53. The subject of Isaiah 53 is the suffering servant, in which Isaiah describes a figure, personality who suffers for different reasons, through no fault of his own, and he has a redemptive aspect to him. There's a redemptive causation in what he endures. And traditional rabbinical understanding of this personage in Isaiah 53, it varies. According to some opinions, it is a certain historical figure. Others say it is the future Messiah, and some say that it represents a personification of the Jewish people, of Judah, especially Judah in his period of exile until the coming of the future Messiah and the future redemption. And this is the opinion that we think is the most pertinent. It corresponds the most closely to the biblical verses. Taking Isaiah 53 as describing the Jewish people, we are told that the Jews suffered due to other people. He was the first victim. He was the eternal scapegoat for the faults and the misfortunes of others. In the future, the Gentiles and non-Jewish peoples will admit that Judah was accused. He was considered accursed, but his affliction, that is the faults that he had, the impairments that he had, were a result of him having dwelt amongst them and having had to bear the imprecations that they had cast upon him, and to conduct himself in a way that they desired that he conduct himself in order not to expose himself to the vicissitudes of their vindictiveness and malice. And so the Jew formed himself according to the expectations of the peoples he'd sojourned amongst. And this formation was often negative, and it had negative effects on the peoples around them, and negative effects upon the Jews themselves. The Gentiles will admit that the Jew was considered to be accursed, but in effect the only accursing was that which they had given unto him, that they had imposed upon him. The Jew was punished for the sins of others. The Jew succeeded in dedicating himself to the law when he could, when he was forced by outsiders or seduced by the surroundings, to abandoning the study of the law. Then he applied his energies in other fields, in other aspects of existence, to business, to jurisprudence, to trade, to science, philosophy, philanthropy. Whatever he did, he applied himself with great dedication. And that perhaps is one of the secrets of Jewish success. Insofar as they have been successful, it's not so much that they are more intelligent or that they are born gifted, so though in some cases it's also true. But more than that is that they apply themselves, that they work at it, that they study hard. They do not distract themselves by superfluous and extraneous and unnecessary interests. This is what the Jew was born this way, was born to learn the Torah, and when he does not apply himself to the Torah, he applies himself to whatever he does using the same energies that he previously had been given for the Torah. The sins of others are often transported upon the Jew. See 55:11. He has to bear the sins of others as if he was guilty for what they had done or what they thought of doing. They project their own imperfections and their own lusts and sins upon him. In the last days, Judah shall be rich and powerful and a great nation. He will be among the greatest nations that ever existed. He shall divide the spoil with the strong. Judah shall be a military might, an old lion which must be dealt carefully with respect, and a new lion, according to the prophecy. He was numbered with the transgressors. Jews were accused and still are of all the sins under the sun, and still more, and of being criminals and controlling all the crime and mischief of the world. It's what Jews have been numbered with the transgressors, as if he had sinned, he hadn't done anything, he doesn't do anything. He is more law-abiding than the peoples around them, but they accuse him of causing all of the crime. And here and there are a few Jewish criminals, not very many. Nevertheless, because there are a few, because he's not disliked, he is accused of being guilty of all the imperfections that the others are committing. He bare the sins of many. Not only was Judaism made responsible for the sins of others, but also in some cases he took it upon himself to make retribution for the faults of others. He made intercession for the transgressors. He helps people. He helps correct people, helps people reform themselves. This is what he does, this is what he believes in. The Jew helps others, he helps himself. Jews champion the oppressed and they seek to help others, whoever needs help. Even when those who are in need of help are the cause of their own downfall. See Isaiah 53:12. Isaiah beginning from the beginning, Isaiah 53 beginning from 1, it says, "Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as root out of dry ground." He has no form or comeliness. He doesn't look good. And people draw caricatures of him with his big nose, or his assumedly big nose, and all kinds of things that they make fun of and ridicule. He has no form or comeliness, and we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. People don't even want to look at him, don't want to consider him, don't want to countenance his countenance. He was despised and we did not esteem him. People overlook him, despise him, and assume since he is despised there must be something despicable about him, when the exact opposite is the truth. And all of these descriptions are pertinent to the persecuted Jews of history. The Jews that were persecuted, they were downtrodden, they were forbidden to dwell in open-aired houses, and they were forced to dwell in ghettos, prohibited to leave their ghettos at night, and even during the day. Compelled to stay confined, and in Germany they were forbidden to even marry, and if they did marry, they did get a license to marry, one of the few. Then they were forbidden to have more than a certain number of children and so on, and a certain, throughout the place, wherever they were all kinds of limitations were placed upon the existence that was permitted them. They were often small of stature because they were living in confined spaces. They grew up stunted and forced to adopt a servile demeanour, to act servilely, to be servile. And sometimes their very children would be taken from them or killed before them. And all this constant degradation and persecution, this influences how a person walks, how a person bears himself, how he holds himself, what he is. A Jew was forced to act as if he was despicable, and consequently he was even more despised. In Muslim lands it was even worse. Don't let anyone tell you that it was relatively good for the Jews under the Muslims. It was worse. Maimonides speaks of this. He has a whole letter, a whole work about it. And he says that the Jewish people have suffered more under the Muslims than amongst any other people. And this was true. Despite here and there was okay, it wasn't so bad for limited periods of time alone. Most of the time it was very difficult, and it was worse under the Muslims than it was under the Christians. And he goes on, 53, Isaiah 53:4, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. And the Lord has laid upon him the iniquity of us all." The Jew came to reflect the values of his persecutors. They needed him to loan money. They despised people who lent money with interest, but they needed some money from somewhere. Or they had money of their own and they needed to lend it out at interest, but they couldn't do it themselves. So they used the Jews as intermediaries. And they also blamed the Jews and condemned the Jews for doing what they needed him to do. And they didn't allow him to do anything else. The Jew did things the Gentiles needed and the Jews were condemned for it. The Jews were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to be farmers, not allowed to grow grapes, not allowed to occupy themselves by numerous trades. All other occupations were closed off to them. And so on. Amongst the Gentiles, infanticide, killing children, and child abuse were very frequent sins. Amongst the Jews it was almost unknown or unknown altogether, but nevertheless the Gentiles spread false tales about the Jews as if the Jews killed Christian children and did things to them. And these were all lies, and if anyone did anything to anyone, it was Christians doing it to their own children or to those of the Jews. But nevertheless, the Jews were blamed for doing things that they hadn't done. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, Isaiah 53:7. He opened not his mouth, he was led as a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep before its shearers is silent. So he opened not his mouth. And they created, and then we find a reflection of this in the plea found in Psalms. In Psalms 44, prophecies was a prophecy. Psalm 44 was written by King David and was a prophecy of the conditions that Judah would suffer under in their time of oppression, in their time of exile. And it says, you have cast us off and put us to shame. You do not go with our armies. You make us turn back from the enemy. And those who hate us have taken spoil for themselves. You have given us up like sheep intended for food, and have scattered us among the nations. You sell your people for next to nothing, and are not enriched by selling them. You make us a reproach to our neighbours, a scorn and a derision to all those around us. You make us a byword among the nations, a shaking of the hair of the head among the peoples. My dishonour is continually before me, and the shame of my face has covered me. Because of the voice of him who reproaches and reviles, because of the enemy and the avenger. And Isaiah 53 repeats this message. Isaiah 53:8. He was taken from prison, from judgment, and who will declare his generation? He was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. Jews were often in prison. They did not receive fair trials or even any trial at all. Instead, they simply had to suffer, and the Jew was punished due to the crime done to his own people by they who were punishing him. They did the crime. They affected the Jews. And then they accused the Jews of having sinned for being as he was a result of what they had done to him. The Jew was punished due to the crime done to his own people. Nevertheless, the faults that were in him were often those he had acquired through association with his persecutors. The punishment was not proportionate. That is, even if here and there you get Jews, so not perfect. Very often that is because they have picked up bad habits from the Gentiles and been forced to act as the Gentiles act, or been allowed themselves to be tempted, to be seduced into doing so, but they never act as bad as the Gentiles do. But even so, they are accused and they are condemned as if they had been the initiators and they had been worse than anyone else. This is a phenomenon that repeats itself over and over again. And you find that Zechariah talks about this, or about something similar. Zechariah 1, verse 15. I am exceedingly angry with the nations at ease, for I was a little angry and they helped but with evil intent. In other words, maybe the Jews had not acted as well as they were expected to do. Maybe they did deserve some degree of punishment. But the Gentiles were not to take it from them, and not to take from them to the degree that they took from them. They exceeded what they had been permitted to do, and they would be punished for it. This is the warning of the prophecies. Isaiah 53:9, and they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. What's he talking about here? He said they made his grave with the wicked, with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Rabbi David Kimhe, 1160 to 1235, he explains this to mean the Jews killed along with the wicked, as if he had done something bad. That is right, the Jews was a crime to be Jewish. You could be punished for being Jewish. Doesn't matter whether you had done something or not. It was enough that you were Jewish and you're automatically guilty and you would be punished for it. We saw this in the Holocaust and we saw this in numerous occasions. Throughout the centuries we saw similar deeds and similar attitudes. If a Jew was rich, he was killed for his money in order to take his money from him, or to take his job from him, or to get rid of him. In Germany, the Jews in Germany were about 0.5%, 0.5% of the total population. In other words, 1 in every 200 person was a Jew, not more than that. But nevertheless, here and there, the Jews were prominent. They were prominent in the academic fields. They were prominent in jurisprudence as lawyers, as doctors. Here and there, traditional Jewish occupations that the Jews had picked up and that they were quite good at, the Jews were prominent. And so who were the people in Nazi Germany who were most against Jews, who were the most anti-Semites? The doctors, the Gentile doctors, or the Gentile academics, or the Gentile lawyers, or the Gentile teachers. They all hated the Jews because they felt that the Jew was too big, was taking their jobs away from them, or they wanted to take the positions that the Jews held. Or in some cases, other cases, they would inform upon the authorities as to where Jews were, as to where Jews were hiding and so on, because they wanted to take their houses. They wanted a vacant house that the Jew would live, and they would take the houses, or they would take their property, or they would rob them. And this is all, and also the pogroms. Very often the pogroms were because the local people were in a very difficult situation. They didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have enough property. The Jews had a little bit more. The Jews didn't spend all their money on drinking or very little of it. And they worked harder and they made a little bit of money, so they were, relatively speaking, on a comparative scale, maybe better off than their Gentile neighbours. So the Gentile neighbours would get together and attack them and then steal from them everything that they had and drive them away. Because this is human nature. You need something, you see someone who's weak, vulnerable, and the authorities will not interfere if you take it from them. So there are people who cannot resist the temptation, so they take what is there by force. And the Jews suffered from this throughout their history. He was rich, he was killed for his money. If he was not rich, he would be killed as if he was rich. He was accused of being rich, and if he was not rich, he was killed because they thought he was probably hiding his money. He would be tortured to death. And if he was rich, they would assume that he'd taken it from others. He'd taken it at the expense of others, whereas more often than not, he'd actually worked very hard for it, and worked harder than anyone else had for the little that he had. And then, indeed, in the Holocaust, this is one of the motivating factors of many of the perpetrators against the Jews at the local level. And despite this, on the whole, Jews did not require measure for measure. They are too good for their own good. They do not take vengeance on the whole. Perhaps they should, but the reality is that they usually did not, even when they could have. It pleased the Lord to bruise him, see Isaiah 53:10. It pleased the Lord to bruise him, he has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he had to pay for the sins of others. We don't exactly know why it had to be this way, but there was a reason for it. And then, despite this, in the end times, he will be repaid, he will be requited, he will be rewarded, and he will be compensated for what had been done unto him. Isaiah 53:10 said, he shall see his seed, he shall see children after him, and grandchildren and descendants. He shall prolong his days, he shall live a long life, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Everything he does will prosper, and God will be happy through him, and he will be happy through living in the right way and going in the way of the God Almighty. In the end times, the Jew will be rewarded, he shall live a longer life, he will have children and children of children, he will see them, the knowledge of the Torah will gladden him. See Isaiah 53, verse 11 on, he shall see the labour of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many. For he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, And he was numbered with the transgressors, and he bore the sin of many, and he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. So that is Isaiah 53, according to our understanding and according to most, or a good portion of the commentators, the classical commentators on it, and according to how we understand it, it is the interpretation that is most pertinent and that corresponds most closely to the simple meaning of the verses. May we all know only good things. May we all go in the way of God Almighty. May the Lord God of Israel teach us all to do what we have to do and to understand what is required of us, to be able to do it as well as we can. And may all of Israel be blessed through the Bible. Thank you very much.